Welcome back.
Hi.
We're here with another episode of Coven, episode 2, season 2. This is a podcast where we discuss our dream Coven roster. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Coco.
And we're your hosts.
Yes. So today it's my turn to invite someone into our Coven, welcome them.
But before we do that,
right. Yes,
I want to do our magic moments. Get back into that a little bit. This is the part of the show where we talk about any magical thing that happened to us in the week. Synchronicity can be repeated numbers, can be a crazy dream that we had, or anything of the sort. So I guess I can start.
Yeah, you go first.
My magic moment for the week was just the number 3. I had a really crazy week with midterms and preparing for this podcast and all so many things in my week. And there was a moment where I had just gotten off of work and I was in a cafe nearby and I looked down at my phone and it was 3:33. And for those of you who don't know, I have a 3 tattoo because that's my life path number. I'm the 3rd sibling in my family. It's a very significant number for me. And it was 3:33. And I was like, oh, fun. Love that. Always nice to see that. And then I look up, and the first thing I see, like right in my line of vision, is a taxi right outside the window. That's 333. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. And then as soon as I thought that's crazy, my favorite song, and not my favorite, one of my favorite songs, I Love You Always Forever by Donna Lewis, it came on the speaker. And that was a song that was like a huge portal song for me that pushed me out of a hard place into where I am now. And I literally out loud was like, what the fuck? What the hell? It was like one of the most powerful synchronistic moments I've experienced. So.
Yeah. I never question the universe when the universe throws those kinds of things in front of me. And it's interesting that you say 3:33 because I have always, there's probably I would say at least 50 pictures, screenshots of 3:33 on my phone because those numbers for me are very synchronistic as well. But interestingly, my magic moment was that I wasn't seeing 3:33. I was seeing 111. Ever since you and I talked about that, those numbers, all of a sudden it was like 111 or 11. Pretty much every time I'd look anywhere and I'm like, all right, whenever that happens, I feel like I'm on the right track and moving in the right direction.
And we're recording this today on November 1st, 111.
Oh, yeah.
And our first episode is coming out
on 111.
On 111.
Yeah. Wow, crazy.
Love that. Okay, so this is the part of the show where Coco is going to give me a birth chart to look at of the person that she's welcoming into our coven today. I don't know who Coco has researched, who Coco is bringing. So this will be a blind birth chart reading where I'm just going to see if I can kind of pick up on some things about this person's personality or their life just based on their birth chart. So.
Yeah. And before I hand you the birth chart that I'm going to hand you, this person, actually, there were 3 different birthdays that were floating around that I found through my research. But I looked at all 3 of the charts, and then I also just kind of, when I was reading about this person, this date seemed like the most accurate. And then I don't know a birth time, so I'm just guessing about their ascendant, but it seems to work. So here is their chart.
Right. Wow.
I know. So what stands out to you at first glance when you see this?
Okay, well, first, for those of you who are not watching this person is a Scorpio sun, November 12th. They've got a Libra moon. Coco has made them an Aquarius rising, which is the same as my person last week. Yeah. Which is fun. We have a Leo Mars and a Sagittarius Venus. Gemini, Pluto, Saturn, North Node. Cool. Midheaven in Scorpio, Jupiter in Libra. Okay, so what do I see here? Well, a lot of Sagittarius. Big Sagittarius stellium. You got Mercury, Venus, Uranus, Neptune, and South Node. All within 10 degrees.
So is there any specific thing that you are seeing?
Don't give me hints.
I can't help it.
There's lots of specific things that I'm seeing. And then also all of this is opposing her Pluto, their Pluto, Neptune, and North Node in the fifth house. Sorry, Pluto, Saturn, North Node in the fifth house. So, okay, first, I mean, the 11th house Sag, again, like my person before in my, like, last week's episode, like Alice, that's somebody who is very, one thing you hadn't mentioned with Alice that I'm going to point out here is the freedom side of Sagittarius. Alice was all about freedom. That was what she was trying to free people. And meditation was her way of feeling free no matter what. So I would expect maybe that those themes of transcendence and freedom, and your hint last week was transformation. So that makes a lot of sense. Somebody who plays a role in their community that really helps to push the boundaries and awaken people into things, because Neptune is conjunct Uranus, and that's like massive spiritual enlightening, awakening, but in a way that's like, let me just take what you thought your reality was and throw it away, like totally shatter your belief system and present it to you in a way, present a new one to you in a way that is maybe alarming, but with that you have the exact conjunction of the Venus and Mercury in Sag. So that's somebody who's pretty artistic and pretty well spoken, definitely like poet vibes. Is that accurate? Okay.
Yes.
I mean, that's just an obvious poet placement. I mean, you have the Sagittarius, Venus and Mercury all together. It's somebody who strings words together in this very revolutionary but like prophetic, philosophical way, but it's like beautiful. Very artsy way.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
And that's also her South Node. So South Node being in the mix there is like, this is this person's comfort zone. Like this is their natural gifts. They didn't really need to like learn anything to get to them to experience these things. Opposite of that is the Pluto and Saturn in Gemini in the fifth house with the North Node. So that's like they're being really pushed toward toning it down, constricting it, restricting it, like taking all of that massive macro energy. They want to be out in the public. They want to be seen. They want to be sprouting all these ideas, but they need to learn, and they were being pushed to learn how to channel it into specific places and to figure out like maybe discernment and how they can actually contribute to lasting change.
Are you psychic?
It's all in the stars, baby. Yeah, the Saturn and Pluto together, that's like time, and that's like commitment, and that's like something that lasts. And the North Node can be your legacy a lot of the time. And in the fifth house, it's creative expression, but it's more about the singular person, as opposed to, it's ruled by Leo, so it's the child. So I wonder if there's something to do with children, too, that could be quite significant.
The fifth house is ruled by Leo. I see what you're saying. Okay, well, the fifth house here is actually ruled by Mercury because it's Gemini, but...
Oh, yeah, her fifth house is Mercury, but the fifth house is the house of Leo, so that those, like, themes of, like, autonomy and self-expression and creativity and validation in a lot of ways. It's kind of like being pushed to bring it back in, and more immediate, like discernment, boundaries, that kind of thing. And with Pluto there, the finding boundaries and discernment around ways to actually implement these changes into very like tangible, down to earth things. Ascendant, opposite Chiron, with Mars in the seventh house in Leo. I know for my person last week, the Leo seventh house made sense because she was married to a superstar. I wonder if this person's attracted to people larger than life, drawn to people who are...
I'm sorry, I can't help it. Sierra and I are looking at each other right now because
this is what last week. This is last week.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's so fun. Yeah. So and a lot of wounds around that. Maybe some a lot of triggers around these types of partners that they're drawn to, because Mars there with Chiron is quite triggering in Leo. And all of that's also trining all the Sag stuff. So it does feel like there's a lot of energy that's expressive and out, and it's kind of all over the place and chaotic. But what their goal and what their purpose is in this lifetime that they had was to take all of this chaos that's happening and all of these just triggering intense ideas and themes, and to condense and to create something small but extraordinarily impactful. Take all of this and turn it into a bomb and drop it right when they die. But yeah, and then the Libra moon, I guess, is the last thing that I'll say. Libra moons are diplomats. So it's you have all this really intense chaos energy, and then you have the moon that's they can work with people. they can adapt. They can be what people need them to be when they need to be. Yeah.
Wow. Yes. So, are you ready?
I think
you can hang on to
I think that's I'll keep hold of this. But I didn't talk about their Scorpio sun, but I'm sure that just adds an element of intensity.
If you want to go,
it just makes it. It just probably intensifies all of it, deepens all of it. Maybe adds a little bit more of a reserved quality, as opposed to normally you'd think all of this fire and all of this in the northern hemisphere would make this person really extroverted. Having a Scorpio sun, which is right on their midheaven, does kind of add a layer of secrecy and hidden things to it.
Okay, so the person that I wanted to welcome into our covenant's name is Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz.
Ooh.
Sor means sister, by the way. So that's not her first name. Her first name is actually Juana Inés, Juana is her first name.
Sounds like Jenna.
Yeah,
it's close.
I wanted to give a couple of quotes just to set the scene so that you can kind of get an idea of who this person was. And
I've never heard of this person.
Yeah, I had never heard of her either. But I wanted to talk about someone that I lived in Spain for 3 years, and I'm also Mexican American, and she was born in Mexico, but she is basically, her parents were called criollas, and that means that one of her parents was of Spanish descent, and she lived in New Spain in Mexico during colonial times, basically.
Okay.
But she's a proto-feminist, so she was a feminist before feminism was a thing, and I just wanted to read a couple of quotes from her. One from a poem that she wrote called "You Foolish Men," and then another one is
so true.
And another one is just a quote that she was heard saying. So I'm going to say them in Spanish first, and then I'm going to say them. I give you a rough translation. And the reason why I wanted to say them in Spanish is because a lot of times poetry is, I don't know about any other language, but since I speak Spanish, it sounds so much more beautiful in Spanish than it does when you try to translate it into English.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like poetry is like the art of words. And when you're writing poetry, just in the native tongue in general, is always going to be the best way to listen. Because it's not just about the meaning of the words. It's the words themselves have an essence to them. And part of poetry is the sound of the actual words that you're consuming.
Yes, exactly. So I'm just going to give you this first quote in Spanish first, and it goes like this. Hombres necios que acusáis a la mujer sin razón, sin ver que sois la ocasión de lo mismo que culpáis. And in English, roughly is translated as, you foolish men who lay the guilt on women, not seeing you're the cause of the very thing that you blame. So that's the first quote.
True.
Right? It's pretty amazing. I mean, especially for the 17th century, women were to be seen and not heard, barely seen and not heard.
No, she said, I will be heard.
Yes. And then the second quote is just a quote that she was talking about her learning. She said, yo no estimo tesoros ni riquezas, y así siempre me causa más contento poner riquezas en mi pensamiento que no mi pensamiento en las riquezas. And again, roughly translated, that means I do not value treasures or riches, and so I always feel more content to put riches in my thoughts than not put thoughts into riches. So that was her way basically of saying that material things don't matter to me as much as learning. That was so important to her. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about her life first. And by the way, she had 3 different birthdays floating around, but again, November 12th, 1648 was the one that seemed to resonate most with her, and that was the one date I kept seeing everywhere I was looking. So she was born Juana de Asbaje y Ramirez de Santillana, and by the way, a lot of the names that I'm going to be saying are going to seem incredibly long. And I lived in Spain for 3 years, actually. And everybody there, including myself, while I was living there, had to have 2 last names. It's their, it's like they have their first name, their middle name, and then they have their father's name, and then they have their mother's maiden name.
Right. I remember hearing about this from someone. I didn't know that was a thing, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah. So a lot of the names that I'm going to be saying are going to be extremely long. Anyway, she was born in what was then San Miguel Nepantla, which was in Colonial Mexico, New Spain, near Mexico City. And it is actually now named after her. And it is called Nepantla de Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. So her mother was Doña Isabel Ramirez de Santillana y Rendón, and she was a criolla. And do you know what a criolla is? I didn't know what it was either, actually, but it's a term for a person who was born in New Spain to a Spanish parent. Oh, I already actually talked about this earlier. Sorry. Her father was a Spanish captain who wasn't involved in her upbringing, and his name was Don Pedro Manuel de Azuaje y Vargas Machuca. He was a Spanish Navy captain from the Canary Islands involved in colonial transatlantic shipping and trade. So we know what that was about, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly, so she had 2 sisters from her mother and her father, but her mother and her father never married. And then her mother had 3 other children with another man, and they never married either. And what I found interesting about that whole situation is that she was not considered illegitimate. So apparently that was a normal thing, even though they were very, very Catholic.
Yeah.
For some reason in New Spain, it was just kind of like okay for people to have illegitimate children,
and it wasn't looked down upon in that way.
No, and in some of the readings that I did for the research, it said that it was possible that she escaped illegitimacy because of her grandfather, who was a wealthy landowner. But it just seemed like it wasn't just because of that. There was it just wasn't so stigmatized. And my husband Chris brought up a really interesting point, because he was saying that it's possible that they were trying to populate the area because they were colonizing.
It was that makes a lot of sense.
Were you gonna say something?
I was just gonna say, looking at her chart, thinking about her family dynamics, did her dad die at a certain point? I mean, obviously he's not alive. He's not with us today.
No. He did die, actually.
Because I'm like her moon, like there's not a ton of like hard aspects with her moon and stuff that I would think. I mean, her moon is like loosely trine her Saturn, but there's not like a lot of familial things in her chart that I would think.
I don't really think that, I mean, from everything that I read about Sor Juana, just learning and creating, that's really all she wanted to do.
That makes a lot.
So even though she escaped the stigmatism of stigma of being illegitimate during that time, she was still subject to gender restrictions of this thing called Marianismo. And Marianismo is a belief system enforcing a woman's role as caregiver and domestic figure. It was supposed to be the ideal of true femininity, where women were supposed to be modest and virtuous.
Okay, how have we gone back to that with the trad wife?
Sexually abstinent until marriage, and then faithful and subordinate to their husband.
I feel like that's like a trend right now to like be in that place again.
Really?
Which is, have you heard of trad wife thing? I don't know if maybe we should get super into it, but yeah, I feel like it's like a trend like online of like, it's like a super like fun thing. First of all, like
fun?
Yeah, it's like all these who call themselves trad wives and like traditional wives. And they're on a farm and they're like, I just want to step into my feminine role of being the childbearer and the meal preparer. And I think there's more to it. So I don't want to like put a blanket statement on all trad wives. That's just been my impression of it. Maybe there's more to it that I'm missing.
To each their own, you know? Like, if they're happy
and that's what they want, that's wonderful. That's great. And that is, I guess, a form of empowerment of being able to make that decision with how you experience your femininity and express that. But
yes, but for Sor Juana, that was not what she wanted. No, not at all. She had an insatiable appetite for learning and pleaded with her mother to please let her go to school. She had very little access to education as a child, and that was kind of on par with what it was like to be a girl growing up in that area at that time. She could be found hiding in a chapel of the hacienda where she lived, just looking at her grandfather's books. She wanted to disguise herself as a boy to go to school. But the stories go that when she was 3, she could read and write in Latin already. Wow. So she was a prodigy.
That Venus, Mercury, and Sag.
Yeah.
Conjunction, that makes sense.
Yeah. So she followed her older sister. Well, I was also thinking about the Pluto Saturn that she had in her 5th house, as far as like, so she followed her older sister to school one day when she was 3 years old. And the story goes that when she got there, she told the teacher that her mother had ordered her to come to school with her sister and that her mother wanted her to learn as well. And the teacher knew that she wasn't telling the truth, but she thought it was charming and cute. So she gave her lessons anyway. And then by the time her mother figured it out, that Juana already knew how to read
that's crazy.
and speak Latin and read Latin.
That's crazy, thinking of like 3-year-olds, like thinking of like my niece and nephew when they were 3.
Yeah.
They're very smart children, but they could not have learned Latin.
Yeah. No, she was obsessed with reading and taking in anything that she possibly could. By age 8, she was composing her own poetry, and by the time she was a teenager, she was able to understand the Aztec language, Nahuatl, and had begun to teach Latin to others by 13. So when I saw that, I was like thinking about her Saturn in Gemini, and learning being a remedy against boredom and melancholy.
Totally.
And
yeah.
then also Saturn in Gemini gives her the ability to concentrate and absorb information and communicate.
It does. It takes all of the expansive qualities and kind of all over the place thing, and it does channel them into a more.
Yeah. So when she was 16 in 1664, or maybe later, again, not too sure about her birthday, she went to Mexico City to live with her aunt. And this is when she pleaded with her family to let her disguise herself as a boy and receive a formal education, which was not available to young women. Her family obviously did not like that idea, so Juana had to be content with continuing to teach herself in secret, however she could. And this is a quote that she wrote of this time. She said, "It came to my attention that in Mexico City there were schools and a university in which one studied the sciences. The moment I heard this, I began to plague my mother with insistent and importunate pleas. She should dress me in boys' clothing and send me to Mexico City to live with relatives, to study and be tutored at university." So something else that I found really interesting about her, something that I kind of put together. So if she is an Aquarius rising, which I think she is because she's rebellious and just where everything else is placed in her chart, and the Pluto-Saturn, not quite conjunction, but
pretty close,
in her fifth house of games. So she would do these challenges for herself. So she would want to study a subject and she would want to become a master at it. So what she would do is she would cut her hair and make sure that she took note of how much she was taking off, and see how much she could learn by the time her hair grew back to the length that it was.
That's some psycho shit, and that's like such a Pluto Saturn.
To me,
so I feel like no, I mean it's brilliant, but I mean psycho. I mean that in like a insane genius kind of way.
She was an insanely genius. Yes.
Yeah, in just like who thinks of that? Like who thinks like that? And that's like that kind of intensity and like commitment and dedication to that.
Intensity?
Well, I was going to say is the Pluto-Saturn thing. Pluto-Saturn together is like such an insane level of dedication and intensity opposite all of her other planets.
But she's also a Scorpio sun.
But I was going to say the Scorpio sun in the 10th house conjunct the midheaven with the hiding. Again, we were talking about being in the shadows.
Yeah.
And in the way that you present to the world is like overshadowed by something. It's hidden by something. And so she literally has to like disguise herself, like the taboo, the hidden, the mystery.
Yes, exactly. So this is what she said about this game that she played with herself. She said, "There seemed to me no cause for a head to be adorned with hair and naked of learning." Anyway, I thought that was pretty amazing. So I have to talk to you a little bit about what was going on at the time for you to be able to kind of understand and grasp what she was up against, basically. Yeah. So this was obviously the Americas were being colonized at the time. And so the crown, the monarchy in Spain needed to have some kind of a presence there to make sure that everybody knew who was in charge, right? So they would send viceroys. They were called viceroys. They were people that were coming from Spain, from the monarchy in Spain, and being placed in these positions of power to kind of oversee and rule, I guess, so to speak. So when she moved, to Mexico City to live with her aunt, it was kind of like, what are we going to do with you type of thing. So there was this viceroy that moved there in 1664, and his name was Antonio Sebastián de Toledo, Marquis de Mancera. One of those long names.
Is this going to be her superstar boyfriend?
No, no, not even close. No. But it's important. I just bring it up because the wife of the viceroy actually became close to Sor Juana, and so there's speculation about whether or not
her superstar girlfriend.
Well, there's speculation. However, again, we have to think about the conditions at the time. And she did write a lot of love poems, and a lot of the love poems.
That's it. You convinced me. They're in love. I'm sorry.
Well, a lot of the love poems did have the names of. They're called, I don't know how to pronounce it, Vicerine or Vicerine, which is the wife of the viceroy. But that was actually something that was common for people in court to write poetry to the royal or the monarchy that are in charge. So there's a lot of speculation, but there's really no evidence that says that she was in some kind of romantic relationship.
Well, yeah.
So
that's valid.
So Sor Juana was presented at court by her uncle when she was 16, and she was selected to be a lady in waiting to the viceroy. And she started to get this reputation around court that she was a prodigy, that she was smarter than everybody. So, of course, the viceroy decided to get 40 scholars and have her stand in front of these 40 scholars, and these 40 scholars just fired questions at her.
Wow.
And she answered every single one correctly.
Wow.
She obliterated them.
This is reminiscent of Hypatia of Alexandria.
Just a total badass. Like, I feel like she was fearless, honestly.
Yeah.
Especially with some of her writing.
Totally.
And her mind was so complex that she just impressed them with her knowledge. And anyway. As a lady in waiting, she had access to the palace library. And the reason why her relationship with the viceroy's wife was so important is because that, in a way, protected her. So she was able to still write.
Yeah.
Because women were not supposed to be intellectual. She was also very beautiful. So she was doubly threatening, especially to the men that she was around.
Threatening, but also protected, I guess, in a way with that. Like, there's, like, pretty privilege.
Sort of.
Was it not so much in her favor back then?
The women that were in her life protected her more than the men did. And
right.
and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But actually, yeah, the viceroy's wife and then a subsequent viceroy's wife were the ones that helped her and protected her and got her poetry published and her works, helped to get her works published and helped to keep her in a place of learning, which is exactly where she wanted to be. That was the only thing that she ever really wanted to do was just read and learn and write and compose. One of the things that she's quoted as saying is that she felt a total antipathy towards marriage, which means a deep-seated feeling of aversion. She definitely did not want to get married. And the speculation is the reason is that she wouldn't have been able to continue with her studies if she had.
Yeah.
So instead,
maybe she didn't like men. Maybe she wasn't into men. Maybe.
Again, there's a lot of speculation, especially on the internet, about her being queer, but there's no
like hard evidence.
Yeah,
but there wouldn't be.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. So instead of getting married, Juana chose the convent. Again, not for religious devotion, but to have the freedom to study and write. That was when she established herself as Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz.
The medieval genius woman to nun pipeline is hilarious.
I know, right? That was the only way that
happened-
they could
yeah.
learn.
It happens so often because, for so many reasons. But
well, I thought it was interesting too because, again, like, I don't really think that she was necessarily some devout Catholic. However, with all of the Sagittarius placements that she had, that is also religion, philosophy and religion. And so anyway, in 1669, she briefly joined this one convent, the Descalzes Carmelitas of St. Joseph, and she left only after a couple of months, and it's possibly due to it being too restrictive before she joined the St. Jerome order. Intelligent women at the time were regarded as a threat, and so were beautiful women. So, do you know what a confessor is, by the way? Are you familiar with the Catholic?
like Maximus the Confessor.
So a confessor is someone that you go to confess to.
Okay.
So she had her own confessor. I mean, she wasn't the only person that confessed to him, but this was her confessor that she went to, and his name was Antonio Núñez de Miranda. And he is quoted as saying, or he's known to have said that he rejoiced once she was in a convent because her continuing to be in the public eye had the potential to cause a lot of harm because of how beautiful and learned she was. So women joining the convent were required to provide a dowry. And so she actually lived pretty well. She had a two-story apartment in the convent that had a small kitchen, and she bought it actually, and she transformed it into a salon of intellectual and creative exchange.
She really was giving some Hypatia energy.
Yeah,
which Hypatia had a lot of Sagittarius as well, obviously.
Yeah. Philosophy, religion.
Yeah, that's super interesting too because all of the Sag with Alice's chart last week, in the 11th house as well.
Yeah.
We didn't really mention this, but that it really gives starting your own church.
Oh yeah.
Vibe with the 11th house Sagittarius energy.
Yeah.
And same vibe here, and so it's like literally starting a church.
Yeah, when I saw the chart from last week, I was like, wow, this looks it's I mean, it's not too similar, but I saw definitely some similarities. Yeah.
For sure.
So, at times while she was at this convent, occasionally she was the convent's bookkeeper, and apparently she did an excellent job of managing the convent's funds. She taught music and drama at the convent school. It was also possible that she's a painter. However, we're not really sure because there are some, I guess, replicas of paintings of her, but it's not certain whether she painted them or like as a self-portrait or if somebody else painted it. So in 1673, this is important, Antonio Sebastián de Toledo Marquis de Mancera, the viceroy that was there, left, and his wife died. Sor Juana wrote 3 sonnets commemorating her passing, and then in 1680, Tomás de la Certa el Tercero Marqués de la Laguna, say that one 3 times fast, became Spain's new viceroy, and his wife, Maria Luisa, was almost Sor Juana's exact age. So they became very close. So earlier when you were talking about...
Super close.
Yes. So when you were talking about the wife of Antonio Sebastián, I was thinking, yes, they were close, but
not
just
like
wait.
This.
Yeah.
Got it.
These two were really close.
They were just best friends.
They were besties.
They were just two girls who were super good friends.
Yeah. So Maria Luisa would visit her at the convent often and arrange for the publication of her work. And so at that time, Sor Juana became sort of like an unofficial court poet. So there were a lot of passionate love poems that she wrote, and they were addressing Maria Luisa. She didn't even say Maria Luisa in her poems. She called her Lisi.
Okay.
And Lisida. But again, this was common.
Yeah. But to this like extent, was it like?
I'm not exactly sure. So I'm not really that knowledgeable about. I think they were called troubadours. They were people in the court that would just write poems to whoever was, the king, the queen, the viceroy, whoever.
I want her to be gay, though.
A lot of people do. A lot of people do, actually. That was one of the things that I was kind of reading about, is that, in some of the biographical material that I would found, they straight up said that she was queer.
Yeah.
However, there is no evidence.
Yeah, it is
that.
important. It is important to stick to the facts and to be like, I guess, correct in our research and sticking to that. But I would like her to be gay.
Well, this is going to make you really happy, because I am going to read to you, and I'm just for time's sake, I won't read the first and last verses of these poems in Spanish, but I'm just going to tell you what the first and last verse said in English. The poem was called "My Divine Lisi."
Come on.
The first verse is, "Do forgive my daring, if so I address you, unworthy though I am, to be known as yours."
What do you mean evidence?
I know.
When there's no evidence? This is like, what other kind of evidence would there be?
I don't know.
A picture of them together?
Maybe.
No, there's...
Wait, so let me read to you the last verse. The last verse is, "In sum, I must admit to the crime of adoring you. Should you wish to punish me, the very punishment will be a reward."
Oh my goodness.
I know, it's amazing.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of talk a little bit about, so this was the time when she was living at this one particular convent, when her and Maria Luisa were friends. This was the time when a lot of her works came out. Unfortunately, most of her works don't have any dates. I would even suffice to say maybe none of them have dates. I couldn't find dates for her works, and everywhere I looked, basically it said that there were no dates. So it's hard to say exactly when she wrote these different poems and plays, but from what it sounds like, this was her most creative time. So she wrote this, I don't know if it was a poem or a work, but it is called it's called La Respuesta, which means the answer. And it was a defense of women's education and intellectual equality. Yeah. This is why I think she was a proto-feminist, because even, feminism wasn't a thing at that time, but she was already fighting for women's rights. She wrote a play called Los Empeños de una Casa, which means the House of Trials, and it's just a comedy. It's a comedic play that showcased her wit. Then, of course, she had the poem You Foolish Men, which is my favorite. It's a poem critiquing men's double standards towards women. And the one piece that is considered her masterpiece is called The First Dream. And it's a very long, complex, philosophical poem, hard to understand, especially because it was written in 1640 in the 17th century.
Sounds fun, though. I want to read that.
I figured you would want to. Like, Jenna will love it.
Just for the name alone.
She also incorporated different languages and dialects in her works, including Hispanic African dialects. And I'm also assuming Nahuatl, the Aztec language that I mentioned earlier. So, unfortunately, of course, she got pushed back for being the proto-feminist.
Being too perfect.
Yeah. So here's the story, and it's kind of complicated, but please interrupt me if you have questions because it's kind of hard to follow.
Okay.
There was basically there was this bishop that had asked her to write a letter critiquing a sermon of a Jesuit priest from 40 years prior. And this Jesuit priest was friends to the archbishop.
Okay.
Are you following me so far?
Yeah.
So there's three guys.
Yeah. So the one guy's like, hey, can you write a letter that critiques
this Jesuit priest?
This letter that this Jesuit priest.
So this guy, he was a bishop. Mm-hmm. His name was Manuel. I'll just say his first name. Yeah. So he asked Sor Juana to write a critique of a sermon.
Got it.
That had been done 40 years earlier by this Jesuit priest named Antonio.
Okay.
So far we have Manuel and Antonio. Okay. And Antonio was good friends to the Archbishop Francisco. So we've got Manuel asking Sor Juana to write a critique of a sermon done 40 years earlier of Antonio, who is friends with Francisco.
And Francisco is the archbishop of the time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. This is like a novela. So Manuel...
I'm invested.
So Manuel, without Sor Juana knowing, published this critique somewhere. And before the wherever he published it, before the critique, he wrote a letter, but he wrote it as if he were a nun, telling her, oh, you know what, you're really smart, but also scolding her for not being more pious and for being too intellectual. This is where things started to go awry for Sor Juana.
Why do they gotta do that?
Because I don't want to say it, but we all know why. So anyway, it was basically some squabbling men bringing her into the mix, and
this story is like super reminiscent of the Hypatia story. Yeah, without getting too into it, but like a lot of things that you're saying are very similar. To her story.
I'm sure there were many women that were, trying to.
Yeah, but specifically with Hypatia, the government officials not wanting to directly attack one another because it looks bad, and so using a woman who is extremely loved, popular, and secular. Not totally secular, but like not directly involved with these issues, to kind of pin it on, and to solve their issues by violence or by in Hypatia's case violence, but I don't know.
Well, not physical violence, but I'll tell you what happened. Actually, the story made me incredibly sad because because of this whole thing, she got everything taken away from her. She got all of her books, all of her musical instruments, everything. Well, I shouldn't say that they were taken away from her, but they basically asked her to give it all up. So she actually responded to this. That her response was not published. She responded defending her actions and the rights of women to learn. Unfortunately, her response wasn't published, but it was circulated within the Catholic community. And in her response, she said that her desire to learn was not a choice, but something that came to her from beyond herself. It kind of reminded me of Hildegard of Bingen. Like, it's not something that I can even control. It's just something that it comes to me, and I don't know how.
Flowing through,
Yeah.
and I have nothing to do except for let it out.
Exactly. Yeah. So she said she even recalled the time when a mother superior had ordered her to not study from books anymore, which she obeyed. She was a good girl. But because she couldn't stop herself from learning, she would learn about whatever she could. I mean, this just makes me so sad. She would see some children playing with a top. So she would throw some flour on the ground to see if the tip of it would make perfect circles or not. And she said she just couldn't help it. Just any way that she could learn, you know?
That's that insane genius
Yeah.
energy. That's what I'm saying. Like the kind of brain that like, who thinks like that? Who notices these things?
Yeah. She was a genius for sure. She also said that the desire she had to learn had brought her hardship because to be different is to be seen as evil, and a mind like hers was not considered suitable for a woman. When I was reading this, I was like in tears. It just like made me feel, just because, you know, we know what it's like to be oppressed in this time and age as women, but I cannot imagine being in her shoes and just having this intense desire to learn, and you're not allowed to.
Yeah.
It's considered
Just
evil.
barriers everywhere.
Yeah. So she called her poetry her, quote, twice unhappy ability. Repeatedly in this response, she says that her intelligence and desire to learn are a hardship because of her gender. And it wasn't published, but it was passed around in religious circles. And this was awful too. Her confessor that I was telling you about earlier, Antonio, was reported as saying that if he would have known that she was going to be doing all of this writing and learning, that he would have rather seen her married. So instead, the archbishop, being the dick that he was, demanded that she give up her studies. So, yeah, so it was kind of a bummer. Sorry to bring us down, but something interesting coming up now. So there were
How dare you tell her story?
I know.
Accurately.
So there were a couple of eclipses that had happened that in 1691, and apparently the eclipses were either said to have predicted this weevil infestation and flood that happened, or it caused it, because you know when eclipses happen, it just kind of
a lot of
changes everything and causes a lot of chaos. So I looked at both of the eclipses in 1691, and one happened on May 27th, and then the other one happened on August 23rd. And the August 23rd one, and I'm so sorry I didn't print out a transit chart, but the August 23rd one showed Mercury and Virgo squaring her natal Mercury in Sagittarius, and Saturn and Scorpio conjunct her natal sun. So it made sense that all of that would like be taken away.
Yeah.
So at the end of her life in 1693, she sold off her library and her collections of scientific and musical instruments and gave all the proceeds to the poor. So even in this horrible place that she was in, she was still, you know, thinking of others, because yes, she was loved, and she wrote some really beautiful poetry that was loved by people, and etc. Anyway, so she renewed her relationship with her confessor on March 5th, 1694, and wrote a repentance that she signed in blood. And it sounds super dramatic. It sounds
Saturn-Pluto conjunction.
It does sound...
Saturn-Pluto, that is the brain.
Yeah, it does. It sounds really dramatic, but apparently this was like a common practice.
No, I love it. I think it sounds sick.
I looked at the transits on this day, and Saturn in Capricorn makes a square within 2 degrees of her natal Jupiter in Libra. So again, taking more away from her artistic, because to me, her Jupiter in Libra was, you know, beauty and art and writing and a lot of it.
In her 9th house too, so it's got that energy.
So she spent her last years caring for fellow nuns during there was a plague, and then eventually she succumbed to it herself and died on September 17th, 1695. And
she'd be like 50?
46. Yeah, around that age. Again, we're not exactly sure about her birthday, but I'm pretty sure that this just seems like it would fit. So her curiosity, her rebellious intellect, her refusal to conform made her a woman who was not afraid to be herself unapologetically. And despite living in a restrictive society, she pursued her passions and spoke her mind. And that is why I wanted to invite her to join our coven.
Yeah. Welcome. Welcome, Sor Juana.
When you were telling me about inviting
Inés
people
de
into
la
our coven,
Cruz.
I just like imagined her in our coven meeting room, surrounded by books and quills and maybe the sound of bells in the distance.
Yeah, while Alice Coltrane is off in the corner in her trance-like state playing this most insane harp music we've ever heard.
Yes.
We'll have Sor Juana in her little corner writing her like
Yes.
here like ferociously writing a poem of some kind, and then you're like, "Hey, Sor Juana, what do you think of this?" She'd be like, "What?" Sounds great. Love it.
Yeah. She was pretty amazing. So
what an incredible person.
Yeah, she was amazing. And like you said, when you first asked me if I wanted to do this podcast with you, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect, but you're absolutely right. It's almost like you form this connection, this bond with this person. Yeah, that you research and think about. And it's almost kind of bringing her back to life in a sense. Going to the archives, and looking at who she was and kind of bringing her back into our consciousness and our awareness.
Going into the underworld.
Yeah.
Persephonic themes.
Yeah.
I decided to make a word called persephonic.
I like it.
I don't know if it's a word that exists, but to describe themes of Persephone.
I love it.
But that going into the underworld and reviving these people who haven't been talked about enough.
Yeah, and who were up against so many unfair challenges. And just kind of, I don't know, I just she felt like she was in a prison to me her whole life. And so I wanted to free her.
Yes, be free, little Sagittarius. Wow. I mean, Scorpio sun, but all that Sagittarius energy. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for bringing her into the space.
Yeah. Thank you. And so are we going to get a hint
for my person next week? I forgot to think about this before we did this. No, because I haven't decided on my person for next week. But it's going to be good.
All right.
My hint is that they're really cool.
Awesome.
Cool.
All right. Well,
this has been another episode of Coven. So see y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye.